You guys really wanted me to keep talking about spell list, and I am here to provide. If you didn't see the first video on this topic, you can go ahead and check that one out. Or just let me give you the quick rundown here. Basically, I think spell lists in Fire Emblem are good. They give magic its own unique flavor independent from physical weapons, and they can provide a bit of additional character to the members of your playable roster based on the spells they learn, which is extra nice in a game like Three Houses with its free-form unit building system. However, as I noted there, and as you all know if you're watching this video, the Fodlan games did not introduce spell lists to the series. That honor goes to Fire Emblem Gaiden and its remake, Shadows of Valentia, and there are pretty substantial differences to how these games handle their magical mechanics that I'd like to dive into. Because contrary to my snark in Part 1, I do actually like the Valentian titles, even if they are chronically overshadowed. As a bonus, I'll also get to talk about a mystery third game that's relevant to this conversation. If you've been around this channel long enough or know much about the Fire Emblem ROM hacking scene, it won't be much of a mystery, but for everyone else, I'll conceal the surprise. As uncommon as spell list in Fire Emblem might be, magic in FE2 is, in several respects, an evolution of how it appeared in its predecessor. As in Shadow Dragon, spells in this game ignore both the user's skill and the terrain the target is on, which is more than a fair trade-off with the frankly ridiculous avoid bonuses given by terrain in the Valentian games. Magic in Gaiden does, however, increase in might with the unit's attack, which was not true in FE1. And it's overall pretty neat that this game combines strength and magic into one stat, and so avoids the problem with hybrid units seen elsewhere in the series. The most well-known quirk of Valentian magic, though, is that it costs HP. Unlike in Three Houses, where you can only cast each spell so many times per map, here you instead have to keep an eye on your magic user's health to ensure they have enough to cast, while also not being in danger of dying if they accidentally end up in range of an enemy. Fortunately, there are a number of equipable accessories that restore HP every turn to help out with that. This all gives Valentian casters a vastly different feel from those in other Fire Emblem games, where using them can be riskier, but the rewards for doing so are more readily felt with all the unique benefits that magic brings to the table. And onto the spell lists themselves, these games approach learned magic in a way that ties into their very strong sense of class identity, something that's virtually absent from Three Houses, or indeed any modern Fire Emblem for that matter. There are two magical class lines, each pulling from its own set of possible spells. Mages, which are unisex but have gender-based diverging promotions, and clerics, which are female exclusive. Uneven gender lock has a very long history in this franchise, what can I say? Looking at the clerics first, they all learn the same 2 damage spells, both making their series debut. Seraphim has good stats, and certainly comes in handy against monsters, but the 2 unpromoted clerics are stuck with Nosferatu until they become saints. With that said, Nosferatu here has a unique role not seen outside of the Valentia games. It doesn't cost HP to cast, but rather restores it, making it a useful way for clerics to get their health back so they can cast other spells. Well, it would be useful for that if its accuracy wasn't a literal coin toss, but at least clerics actually have a feasible way to gain experience in this game. FE1 was not so charitable on that score. The 3 clerics also all learn Invoke, which summons a number of NPC minions that can soften up enemies or serve as cannon fodder. Each cleric gets a different class of summons, though, which is something that couldn't really be done in the games with equipable tomes and staves. The rest of the clerics list vary, with Tatiana's being the most distinct since she doesn't get the basic recover, but does learn both of the stronger healing spells to compensate. She is also the only one of the 3 to not learn Expel, which will remove monsters from the map. Interesting to note that this type of utility has never appeared outside the Valentian games, even though there are a handful of others with monster enemies. These differences point to Tatiana being the one cleric to come from Rigel, and thus from a completely separate religious tradition, although there's also the gameplay rationale since she's in the same army as Silk, and there's a benefit to the 2 of them performing different roles. The other category of spell list in Gaiden belongs to the mages. which also includes Celica, although she sort of has her own class. All mages learn the standard fire spell for damage, as well as recover for healing, but the rest of their list pick from a grab bag of 6 different offensive options. Among them, we can see some elements that would go on to become features of later games, like Thunder having increased range, or Excalibur and Aura no longer being character exclusive. The strongest spell in this game, Ragnarok, is learned only by Celica and Delthea, so it's easy to understand why it was chosen to be a part of Emblem Celica's Engage attack. Seraphim also shows up here as the only damage spell shared by both class lines. Every female mage learns it, and in combination with all the clerics getting it as well, that means that every female magic user in Gaiden is good against monsters. And also, strangely enough, is Saber, the only male character to learn Seraphim, and the only one of the mercenaries who can access Mage by looping back to Villager through Dreadfighter to have anything particularly noteworthy in his list. In this game, at least. Because, of course, this story doesn't end with FE2. Shadows of Valentia introduces 6 new white magic spells, along with a handful of others exclusive to the DLC overclasses that I won't be talking about because those aren't tied to individual characters. Echoes also adds the Pitchfork item, which allows any character other than Aum or Celica to reclass. That said though, this isn't Three Houses where the developers came up with individual spell lists even for characters that you should absolutely never make into mages. FE15 instead has 2 generic spell lists, available to most characters who need pitchforks to become magic users. The mage one is actually serviceable, if not amazing, but the cleric one is basically a waste of a pitchfork since it lacks any of the utility that makes the class worth using in the first place. In terms of new characters, Echoes is a mixed bag. Faye is the only one in the entire game to have 2 fully distinct spell lists, depending on whether you send her down the mage or cleric lines. As a cleric, she also gets exclusive access to Anew, which functions like a dancer's refresh in the absence of any true dancers in the Valentia games. Conrad, on the other hand, isn't a mage, and if you use a pitchfork on him, he gets the same spell list as Noma for some reason. And while we're on the subject, the remake makes it all the more obvious that the developers just weren't very creative when it came to male mages, since all 3 of the default ones come with exactly the same set of 5 spells, only learned in different orders. Fortunately, other characters have a bit more to talk about. The cleric spell list remain unchanged, and generally as strong as ever, now with Nosferatu buffed to a whopping 60% accuracy. As for the mages, many of their lists have been filled out with more white magic spells. Tobin and Saber learned Physic, which was once cleric exclusive, while the various new utility options have been assigned with seemingly a bit of irony in mind, like the chatty May learning Silence, or roving wanderer Kamui learning Freeze. Others are more on the nose, like Dean learning Silence. Delthea and Sonia get access to Rewarp, to match their ties to the self-warping witches of the Duma Faithful, with Sonia also being the only character to learn Entrap, presumably for a similar reason. Faye learns Sagittae, which may have helped inspire her otherwise impossible appearance as an archer in Fire Emblem Heroes, while her notable support spells apart from the aforementioned Anew include Freeze as a mage and Rescue as a cleric, both of which may nod to her notoriously clingy personality. There's kind of no getting around that the writing of this game can be occasionally not great, especially when it comes to its female cast. But wait, what if I told you that there was? 2 years ago, I did a video on the ROM hack Sacred Echoes, which excellently replicates the experience of Shadows of Valentia while also making improvements to both its gameplay and its writing that address many of the common critiques of the official release. Those gameplay changes include some notable alterations to some characters' spell list, which makes this ROM hack a fitting note to end this discussion on. Now, I hear you saying, Gascon, you hypocrite. In the last video, you dismissed Three Hopes as a spin-off that you didn't need to talk about, but here you're highlighting a fan-made demake? Well, yes, and here's why. Three Hopes, when you get down to it, just copies over the spell list of its predecessor, adding around half a dozen new characters and subtracting Warp and Rescue because I guess the developers couldn't figure out how to make those work with Warriors gameplay. But in the comments to that video, many of you guys came up with thoughtful suggestions for how to improve Fire Emblem's magic systems. And Sacred Echoes is very much in the spirit of those comments. It's the work of fans taking a close look at one of the games and finding ways to make it better. That's true of roughly a dozen different things in this ROM hack, but even if we're just talking about spell lists, that's worth pointing out, because the developers of this project went above and beyond what must have already been a lot of tricky coding to get Valentia's unique magic mechanics to work in the GBA format. Some of the changes are relatively minor. Unlock and Torch exist as spells because their corresponding mechanics are carried over from the GBA games, and the former even gets a goofy little nod in in-game dialogue. And yes, Bowie will eventually learn Unlock. Also in the vein of diversifying the male mages, Noma has been completely redesigned with his own special class and a spell list that emphasizes support, including Warp and Fortify, which are unavailable to Celica's army in the official games. Female mages get even more goodies, starting with priestesses promoting to a magic-wielding version of Dreadfighter that can loop back around to Villager just like its male counterpart. There's furthermore actual incentive for these characters to do so. In Shadows of Valentia, female mages who reclass to Cleric only get the generic list plus the 1 or 2 white magic spells they learn anyway in the mage line. In Sacred Echoes, on the other hand, May and Delthea retain their native aura in Cleric, and each of them also gets an advanced healing spell. Delthea in particular learns Fortify, appropriately so for the souped-up magical prodigy. Sonya, meanwhile, sees some changes even as a mage, losing Thunder and her healing in favor of a pair of dark spells to better tie into her background as a Regalian and one of Jedda's daughters. This is in fact the second time Sonya's spell list has been redesigned, as she had Sagittae and Seraphim in Gaiden, but lost them in the transition to Echoes. Cleric Sonya additionally keeps some of that Regalian flavor, learning Physic as her base healing spell just like Tatiana. You may, however, have noticed that I've neglected to mention a certain group of characters, the Cypher units that appear in Shadows of Valentia as DLC. No, that's not me snubbing them because Intelligent Systems has forgotten them as far as Heroes is concerned. Rather, the completely legitimate device I use for recording 3DS footage is finicky about FE15's DLC. Luckily though, it's Sacred Echoes to the rescue again, because the Cypher units are available as post-game unlockables. Yuzu and Shade come with the very same spell list as in the official game. Yuzu's still a swordmaster with a list just barely removed from the generic one because Valentia is weird about female sword users, while Shade gets to keep her quirky cleric list. The ROM hack includes even more unlockable units in its post-game as well, including Nui Baba, who joins as a playable Cantor with an assortment of fun dark spells like her signature Medusa. I guess we can say Sacred Echoes beat Heroes to the punch here. But the inevitable question to come out of these two videos is, which of these Fire Emblem spell list systems do I prefer? That's a really tough call. While Three Houses has more spells in play with more individualized distribution, there's something unmistakably alluring about the Valentia game's much stronger sense of class fantasy, especially as that element has been largely lost in the open class systems of modern Fire Emblem. They both have their obvious flaws, as well as room for improvement, but overall I do favor this approach to magic over the more common tomes and staves systems. As with any other mechanic, I highly doubt there will ever be a perfect version, no matter how much IS experiments with the formula. But that's where fan engagement comes in, where we get to share our own opinions on Fire Emblem magic, and occasionally even turn those into fully realized fan projects. So, since we talked all about Fodlan last time, how do you feel about magic in the Valentian games? Like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you aren't subscribed to me but want to hear me ramble more about Fire Emblem and assorted other topics, go ahead and subscribe. My channel has really been growing lately, and I'm so happy to see everybody liking and engaging with my content. Thanks for watching, everyone. Au revoir!